Dark Crisis, they began testing the idea of archetypes. Cards that have a unifying gameplay style and visual theme to make decks less monster mashes, and more you leading an army of cohesive monsters into battle. The idea was kicked off with Archfiends, an archetype that includes a metric ton of monsters, some of whom also belong to other archetypes, like Labyrinth Archfiend and Red Dragon Archfiend.
Wait, what?
The Chess Archfiends of Dark Crisis were the first ones to usher in the concept. What makes an archetype is really simple. As long as a name is listed in quotations on a card, it's officially an archetype. So of course the Archfiends don't actually have their names in quotations on their original printings. Alright, off to a great start. Gotta love the ancient wording on these old-ass cards. Of course you have blue hair and pronouns. The dual monsters would introduce a few other different archetypes to the game, like Gravekeepers, first deck to introduce archetypal spells and traps, Amazoness, and Nephthys, but in GX, they took the concept and ran with it. Out were the days of anime characters playing Fish, the deck. Now they would be playing Elemental Heroes, Cyber Dragons, and Crystal Beasts. This also helped to change up the real game as well, as instead of being hamstrung by having to just print powerful individual cards, they could print powerful cards for specific archetypes. Instead of heroes having to just rely on reinforcements of the army, they could get their own version in E, Emergency Call. Cyber Dragons didn't have to vomit with boring old polymerization to get to their fusion monsters. They could go even further with Power Bond.
I guess it's hard for someone like you to talk about your worries, right?
Why
not try writing a letter instead?
So
Some things are easier to express on paper and are received more warmly that way.
While the concept was still a little touch
speaking
and
from
go in
experience.
5Ds and Zexal,
I bet you are.
Characters playing Monster Mash decks that were retrofitted into archetypes, ArcV and Vrains both went whole hog, and gave archetypes to pretty much every character in the show, no matter how big or small. The game as well got dozens of original archetypes, and as the game advanced, they had to start getting more unique and creative with what they were based on. They covered a lot of really basic concepts early on. Superheroes, cartoon cars, dinosaurs, tokusatsu. I don't know how many times I'm supposed to say tokusatsu, but I know that I'll find enough archetypes to make it fit. Tokusatsu. What happens when you push them to be more creative? Well, that's how you get a recreation of the first Christmas. Except the Star of Bethlehem is a giant f***ing dragon. And outer atmospheric electrical anomalies wearing cool coats. And now, if you'll allow me, I would like to name off just a few of the strangest archetypes Yu-Gi-Oh! Has for your enjoyment. The Cosmos on the outside appear to be an archetype of spaceships and their pilots, but as you look closer, you'll realize... Wait, a farm girl? A tin can? A straw man? A cowardly lion? Cosmos somehow bridged the gap.
Okay,
and crossover
that was weird because it was entirely normal.
The lengths they go to make connections between these two franchises are insane. Like making the Ruby Slippers into Dorothy's ship, the Slip Ride. The Stormtroopers get crossed over with the Flying Monkeys to make Sword Troopers, and the Wicked Witch of the West and Darth Vader were merged to make Darkling. One of Yu-Gi-Oh's most recent archetypes
Reboiled water is fine,
interesting thematic.
I think.
Malice is an archetype of Cyberse monsters, which means they're computer-themed, specifically based on different viruses and malware. However, it just so happens that terms like White Rabbit,
Malice Mansion,
Cheshire all line up with the characters of Alice in Wonderland. Type takes the two and merges them, turning the Cheshire Cat and Red Queen into ransomware. Boojins are one of the craziest, since the series it draws inspiration from is Yu-Gi-Oh! All of the main monsters in Boojin are designed after different characters from the GX anime.
Feel free to take the time
Yamato
to look at the
being
new
Jaden,
supplies, too.
Mikazuchi being Chaz, Harumi being Alexis, so on and so forth. An archetype really can be anything, from French pastries to Iranian birds, to football teams, to extraterrestrials. The variety in aesthetics
great.
archetypes to me, is one of the best parts of Yu-Gi-Oh! Not tying itself down to any theme in particular, and instead going
That's the first time anyone's ever complimented the archetype system of Yu-Gi-Oh!
Really hard about any interest you have, and likely, you'll find a deck based on it.
People say archetypes are a boring system that makes deck building lame and boring. I disagree. To a layman, it looks that
on
way.
Nostalgia more than any other card game.
But it really isn't.
When you think about how most people got into the game, watching the anime, it makes sense that you want to go out of your way to cater to the demographic, coming back to the game, and looking for the cards they played with when they were younger. The problem there is that cards printed before WrestleMania 20 aren't going to hold the test of time versus WrestleMania 40 cards. Dark Magician, a level 7 monster with 2500 attack, was already struggling for relevance when it was released, when Summon Skull stuck its head in the toilet. So, in order to take these old cards and get them ready for the modern day, Yu-Gi-Oh! Will revamp, revitalize, and retrain a monster into something new. Retrain, the term, comes from the card of
Are hair flakes tasty?
Retrain of Celtic Guardian, who is named in Japan, quite fittingly, Retrained Elf Swordsman. Psych. The card was actually mistranslated on purpose due to people hating his real name.
Why are they?
The phrase retrain stuck, so what are you gonna do? So, what is his real name in Japan? Baffling Elf Swordsman. I just can't wrap my head around this motherfucker. The visual
Trying to
of
eat
Red
my
Eyes
hair.
Black Dragon
Flakes.
having to go to the gym to get an effect is funny enough to make it worth keeping. Cards have been getting retrained for decades at this point, with our baffling friend over here being the first example. But if you have a favorite card from when you were a kid, chances are it's gotten a spin shine. Dark Magician? Take your pick between Magician of Dark Illusions, Palladium Oracle Bahan, Nightmare Magician, and Dark Magician, the Magician of Black Magic. You think that's bad? In Japan, this
Good
card
God,
is called
Dark
Black
Magician people are not...
Black Magician. No, thanks, I understand. At least it's not Curse of Dragon, a cursed dragon. So, this is a cursed dragon who
I'm
got
not
cursed
sure I
again.
understand.
This
Does
guy's
it
life
mean
sucks.
I can become
Blue Eyes isn't
stronger?
left out either,
I'm not sure
and
I
he becomes
understand.
Blue Eyes
Does
Alternative
it
White
mean I
Dragon.
become
And
stronger?
because he doesn't have an
I'm
original
not sure
bone
I
in his
understand.
goddamn body, Red
Does
Eyes
it
Black
mean I
Dragon
can bring
becomes
happiness
Red
to
Eyes
even more
Alternative
people?
Black Dragon.
These letters
Sometimes
carry
whole
everyone's
archetypes
wishes.
are made up of retrained
I'll do my
monsters.
best to deliver them as quickly
like
as I can.
zombies featuring famous dragons like the aforementioned Red
Become
Eyes,
stronger.
Belgrand Dragon,
I'm
and
not sure I
Coral Dragon
understand.
after they bit the
Has become
dust.
stronger.
Metaphys takes
I'm not
classic
sure I
boss
understand.
monsters like Tyrant
Does it
Dragon,
mean I can
Dingalus,
become
and
stronger?
shows us what would happen.
I'm not sure I understand.
This is a hilarious
Does
loop.
it mean I can bring happiness become stronger? I'm not sure I understand. Does it mean I can bring happiness to even more
Mementos are a
people?
recent archetype who take molded dirt normal monsters from the beginning of the game and gives them new life by killing them. Don't worry,
letters
you
carry
can get my
everyone's
spirits about the whole
wishes.
thing. There's
Become
even cards like
stronger.
Buster
Yeah, every
I'm not
Yu-Gi-Oh!
sure I
monster
understand.
enjoys dying.
Does it
and
become
Tier
stronger?
Golem Ultimate
I'm not sure I understand.
That show having
Does
more
become
words doesn't mean
stronger?
you actually think.
I'm not sure I
It's one of my
understand.
favorite things in
Does it
Yu-Gi-Oh!
mean
to
I
see
can
old
bring
cards I
become
recognized from when I was a
I'm
child
not sure I
given new life.
understand.
And there's no
Does it
telling what
become
card will be given the
stronger?
chance to show what
I'm
it
not
can
sure I
do.
understand.
Even if it turns
Does
out
it
to not be
mean
very
I can
great,
bring
it'll
happiness
always
to
get a
even more
pop out of me
people?
when I see a card I recognize. And seeing what they decided to give it is always interesting.
I should go buy some shit.
Are you here to see Michi? Feel free to take the time to look at the new supplies, too.
Erratas. Everybody makes mistakes. Yu-Gi-Oh! We call them dual avatars. Sometimes cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are decided to have effects that are too strong to be left around. And more often than not, they're discovered after the card was printed. Cards like Sangan, Ring of Destruction, and Crush Card Virus warp the game around
God, free
themselves
errata, ring of
alone.
destruction.
And clearly cards as strong as these guys can't be allowed to just exist. The usual answer is to just ban them. Lock them up, throw away the key, no need to worry. But then the masochists start to look back fondly on these cards and want to play with them again. Give them downgrades and retrains, but no. They specifically want Sangan, Ring of Destruction, and Crush Card Virus. Alright, Konami says, tossing you back Sangan without any arms or legs. This is what
Opening other people's mail is quite a thrill. Wanna give it a try?
Mistakes, or when a
Black
card in
hearts,
Yu-Gi-Oh!
red
Has its
hearts,
text
broken
retroactively
hearts.
changed to something that wasn't originally
Rip
printed
them
on
all
the
open
card.
and lay them out.
These are often used as limiters on the power of exceptional cards, and are used as ways to bring these cards back in line with the power level.
I like that Path Nowhere gives character growth, but it does make certain dialogue lines awkward.
Become stronger? I'm not sure I understand. Does it become stronger? I'm not sure I understand. Does it mean I can bring happiness to even more people? Become stronger? I'm not sure I understand. Does become stronger?
Forgot how much
I'm
cheaper
not sure I
A-rank centers are to level up.
Does it mean I can bring happiness to even more people?
Guardian is a great example, as once it was released with its new allergy to everything but turds, its usage rate plummeted. The 3 cards you got at the worst.
Let's see what they recommend.
Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, and the previously mentioned
Excuse me?
Destruction and Crush Card Virus. Chaos Emperor Dragon used to be the strongest card in the game.
Afterglow?
From the field to even the hand, which barely any cards are allowed to touch. And then in addition to a card like Sangan, it could bring out Yatagarasu. And then you would be able to destroy your opponent.
I completely forgot about this thing.
And keeping them out of the game. Chaos Emperor Dragon was eventually allowed to come back.
Honestly, that might be better on fucking what's-her-name more.
The other card effects in the turn that you summoned Chaos Emperor Dragon, which not only turned off the Yada lock, but turned off your entire turn. Now you're the one getting your turn skipped. Ring of Destruction got absolutely ruined. Now instead of simply destroying the monster and dealing damage to both players, now you can only use it on the opponent's turn, you can only be used once per turn, you take the damage first, and to top it all off, you can't even kill the opponent with it. Since the
You
monster
technically
has
can.
less attack than the opponent has life points. Crush Card Virus is just pathetic in the state it's in, and doesn't resemble the original at all. Instead of destroying all 1,500 attack monsters your opponent controls, have in their hand, and draw for the next 3 turns, now it will destroy on the field and in the hand, but now the opponent gets to choose 3 cards from their deck to destroy instead, on top of making them invincible for 2 turns. People often argue if it...
wishes. I'll do my best to deliver them as quickly as I can.
I can't tell if she's being genuine when she says that.
It's even worth it to bring back a card as iconic and powerful as Chaos Emperor Dragon, if they're just gonna be pantsed in front of everybody like this. Or if it's better to let them be mythologized on the ban list. With retrains, it's possible to bring back fan-favorite cards while leaving the originals locked away for good.
I can.
And some retrains even manage to bring back the original power of those banned cards at much steeper costs.
These letters carry everyone's
that's really
wishes. I'll do my best to deliver them as quickly as I can.
Tier 0. A common question asked by non-players when Yu-Gi-Oh! Gets brought up is... So,
I'll do my best to deliver them as
what's
quickly
the
as I
best
can.
deck? They usually lose interest after you tell them it's not Raigeki into Silverfang. Determining what the best deck is really varies. Depending on what decks are being played, what cards are legal, and what style of play is popular, there can be a bunch of different
These letters carry
answers.
everyone's
And
wishes.
most of the time, the meta
I'll
of
do
the
my
game
best
is
to deliver
balanced
them as
around
quickly
a
as
few
I can.
decks occupying the top spot of
These
best
letters carry
deck.
everyone's
But
wishes.
on rare
I'll
occasions,
do my best to deliver
a
them
deck
as
will be
quickly. These letters
released that
carry
is so
everyone's wishes.
overwhelming, dominant,
I'll do my
and
best
so
to deliver
without
them as quickly as I
counters
can.
that the community declares it to be a tier above Tier 1, Tier 0. What makes a Tier 0 deck is kinda hard to determine.
I'll do
With
my
some
best to
people
deliver them as
insisting
quickly
that
as I
if it doesn't
can.
have 70% of representation at a major event,
These letters
then it's
carry
not
everyone's
Tier
wishes.
0.
These letters carry
A commonly
everyone's
agreed
wishes.
upon way to think of
I'll do
Tier
my
0
best to
is
deliver them as
that if you're
quickly as
going
I
to a
can.
premier event, and you're planning on encountering one deck in particular, and build around that matchup, you're in a Tier 0 format. The first ever deck to reach this status was the
But like,
predetermined
that happens all the time, though.
featuring Yatagarasu and Chaos Emperor Dragon.
I wouldn't call Malice and Raizio tier 0,
Not
though.
having any cards in hand. This was long before the days where cards in the graveyard could be just as useful as cards on the field. At the time of its release, you either played Chaos Emperor Dragon, or you played to beat Chaos Emperor Dragon. And that means it was tier 0. This sets the template for every tier 0 deck to follow. We're extremely dominant, you take advantage of some mechanic that completely shuts off the opponent's turn, and are only countered by hyper-specific cards and strategies that are really only good at stopping the tier 0 deck. After that came Dark-Armed Dragon, an easy-to-summon and extremely powerful boss monster that made any dark deck leagues better, including the use of a Reno Rana Crush Card Violence. Though it was mostly kept in check by other decks like Gladiator Beast and Lightsworns, the release of Synchro Monsters, Emergency Teleport, and Krevons in the Duelist Genesis Pack brought about a new variant called Teledash, which could combine Synchro and Dark monsters
It's
with
awkward looking.
while also leveraging Dark-Armed Dragon for unbeatable advantage. Zexal would be the first series to pass without a tier 0 format, though plenty of people think Dragon Rulers was tier 0 despite the fact that not only did it never get that full representation it needed, it was also kept in check by spellbooks. The next tier 0 format would come in 2015, with the release of Necrons. This was a ritual deck of all things that got unbelievable support, having rituals that did things both in the hand and graveyard on top of the field, as well as having exclusive access to Jin, Releaser of Rituals, who flat out stopped all special summoning when it was used as ritual material. The Perform Pal and Perform Mage archetypes joined forces in a strategy called Heaven, which was the Arc V era's second tier 0 strategy, which really just vomited guys forever until the opponent drowned in rank 4 Xyz monsters. Zodiac marked the third tier 0 meta of the Arc V era, as the Zodiac deck was just better than every other deck. It's really as simple as that. This deck didn't abuse a mechanic or a broken card, because every card was the broken card. You could Xyz summon using just one monster, and every monster gave those Xyz monsters new effects. These guys are so strong that even unlimiting a few of their cards in 2020 saw them come back into the meta in full force, until Konami undid their uh-oh in 2021. It was the pandemic, we had to make things funny somehow. Moving into the Brains era, and our first tier 0 deck was Spirals.
I'll go.
Spirals were a deck made by the American Konami branch that accomplished dick-ass shit but for the release of their Link monster, Spiral Double Helix. This monster proved that Master Rule 4 was going to be a lot of fun. It turns out giving a deck a way to spam out every monster was a bad idea. The best part about Spiral format was waiting to see just how bad it got. But when tournament results are released in Yu-Gi-Oh!, a common thing to do is release a pie chart to show their representation. And Spiral's representation would be so massive that oftentimes the pie chart would just be a picture of Double Helix, save for the face of Spiral Sleeper. People would then joke that we would know that things had gotten really bad when we saw Sleeper's face. Luckily, I don't think any major tournament ever got that bad, but it was almost that bad. From here, we got a brief reprieve from tier 0 archetypes for about half a decade, until the set Power of the Elements, introducing the world to the Tyr-Element archetype. This was a deck that could to no end, mill cards that would then fusion summon, and summon powerful boss monsters on the opponent's first turn. With the release of cards like Agito the Ancient Sentinel and Kelvek the Ancient Vanguard that could mill up to 5 cards, Tyr-Element had become the undisputed best deck. And potentially the strongest deck of all time in the appropriately named Tier 0. Immediately after Tier 0 ended, we entered another Tier 0 format in Kashtira, a horde of psychic monsters who just made our eyes hard, and that's it. Why is it Xyz is always the one causing problems? You don't see Synchro getting up to mischief like this. The final and most recent Tier 0 format was for Snake Eyes. A deck of fire monsters, just kind of got everything. A Rhoda, a double revive from grave, or starters, then some archetypes had monsters. It was not. Tier 0 decks and formats can be extremely divisive, as some players like to test their mettle with one deck in particular and find all the ways to break it. Other players bemoan the lack of variety and how expensive it can get when there are no alternatives. Everybody needs to play one deck, so everybody who has the cards to make that deck is about to make a lot of money. The very real complaint, though, is that the past 3 formats have been, like, a couple weeks of each other. There was a real time where Kashtira and Tearlaments were stepping on each other's toes. How can we have 2 Tier 0 decks at the same time? As long as Konami needs to keep selling booster packs, they're gonna keep making cards stronger and stronger. And it's likely we're gonna see a new Tier 0 format sooner rather than later. Dual Discs. When a show has the intent of selling merch to kids, you're gonna need that one item that every kid is gonna want. Whether it be the Power Rangers Megazord, the Pokemon Pokedex, or Digimon's Digivice, every show needs one. Yu-Gi-Oh! First seems like it might not have anything like that, since all that's required to play are the cards, a flat surface, and an English diploma. But they had the perfect accessory, the Dual Disc. Now, dual discs were not standard issue at the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan. At first, they dueled in these big custom-built duel arenas that would be a little hard to sell in bulk at Toys R Us. Then afterwards, Kaiba introduced these weird dueling yo-yo tops where you place the card on top, let it rip, as it were, and then the monster would be summoned. It's the sort of thing that would be in line with what Kaiba would have made back in Season 0, but as a replicatable toy, it was as impractical as it was lame. To the point that even in storyline, Pegasus calls it out as kind of a piece of junk. How are you winded after tossing a frisbee? In Season 2, though, with the Battle City tournament, a new solution was needed. See, with the tournament's roving format, the dual arenas of old weren't really applicable.
Why are we only talking about the dual disc now?
Enter the Dual Disc, a portable dual arena that rested on the duelist's wrist, folded in on itself to create the arena, and housed the deck itself. To say this design was iconic would be to call water wet. As from this moment forward, this became the standard way to play the game in the anime for every series afterwards. From Gems all the way up to Go Rush, dual discs have been as important to a duelist as their deck, with certain duelists even getting variants to fit their personality or theming. Axel from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX had a dual disc that could transform into a gun to fit his army theme. Gil Rensford from 5Ds had his fashioned into a shield. And by R5, every dual disc was a hard-light construct with a glow specific to its duelist. They became a really useful shorthand to get across some element of a character with nothing more than what they dueled with.
Oh, nice to see you there now.
What most kids cared about was when they could get their own. Dual discs were released in America in 2000.
Fucking damn it!
Player's collection. Anyone with enough disposable income and enough parents to make that disposable income could have the coolest piece of merch ever. It would pop open just like it did in the show. You could draw cards from it. You could put those cards down. You could flaunt it over your friends who didn't have one? Okay, we're getting the energy back. Yeah, we kind of have a problem where the dual discs don't necessarily do anything on their own, but that was never really the point. They were just supposed to be a fun way to play the game. A way that is cluttered with all sorts of design flaws that don't really take into account how the game is played. The graveyard could only hold about 25 cards until you had to start putting them in your pocket.
Yeah, we're gonna start ignoring that
for space
from
since
now
there was
on.
no room for banished cards or your extra deck. And the slots you were supposed to insert your cards into on the board itself were tight. Too tight. If the cards were sleeved, they wouldn't fit. And if they were unsleeved, they had a nasty habit of bending or creasing cards. Which, even if you disregard resale value, is just a crappy thing for them to do. They don't do much, but what they do they do very well. That didn't stop every single person I knew from wanting one when they were younger. And nowadays, it's regarded as a huge piece of nostalgia for 2000s kids. And if you wanted to be even cooler, you could have picked up the rarer Orichalcos variant that nowadays goes for around $800. In 2019, Bandai Namco would create a newer version of the Dual Disc that, while removing some functionality from the original, would improve upon it in pretty much every way. Like adjusting the slots to hold sleeved cards, and adding lights and music straight out of the original anime.
The sweet fragrance of souls.
When a property hits the big stage as hard and as fast as Yu-Gi-Oh! Did, it's impossible for people to not want to poke fun at it. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the poster child for TV shows where the entire world is centered around the game it's shown. Wars are fought over individual cards. The world is shaped by the will of who can summon out a 3K beater quicker. There is so much stuff to make fun of with Yu-Gi-Oh! It's an embarrassment of riches when it comes to how much you have to work with. You got the silly hair, you got the stupid rules, you got the long-winded speeches. And unlike Pokemon, this didn't take America by surprise. We saw this one coming, we were ready. Parodies of Yu-Gi-Oh! Fall into two categories: internet parodies and the real. On the internet, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty frequent target for jokes and parodies. Obviously the most famous being Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series. There are still a lot of animations parodying Yu-Gi-Oh! That span from the days of Newground all the way up to this very day. The most popular ones include Yu-Gi-Oh! By Punch Punch Forever creator Speedo, Yu-Gi-Oh! Poker Night by Lynch, creators of Cuphead Part 2 Rap Battle Part 2, and Cuphead Part 2 Rap Battle Part 1, and Heart of My Heart by Rice Pirate. Funny thing about Rice Pirate, or Nick Lauer, he's since gone on to become a very successful voice actor, now being heard in things like the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure dub and Leon Abacchio. But do you know what one of his first professional voiceover roles was? Uberjima Masawa in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. Crazy to think that somebody who made a parody of the show would end up voicing a character in it. Although it is kind of backwards, since his role as Roku actually predates his Yu-Gi-Oh! Animation. Which kind of makes it funnier. There's even an annoying orange parody that I would watch, but it would probably be too funny, and I wouldn't be able to get this out on time, so, sorry, Pear. However, online parodies are one thing. With those, there's a much greater chance that the individual or team making it either grew up with the property or enjoy it today. That's visible in the directness of some of the references they pull, and accuracy with which they nail how the original show was presented. The much more interesting ones to me are the ones made in more traditional medias, like TV shows and movies, since they're made with a much more outsider perspective. Rugrats All Grown Up featured an episode called You Gotta Go, which was about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trend, with Chucky feeling ostracized because he's the only one at school without any cards. He somehow didn't feel ostracized by being Chucky from the Rugrats. Codenamed Kids Next Door didn't have a direct Yu-Gi-Oh! Parody, like with cards or anything, but rather had a recurring background character who sported Yugi's iconic hairdo, right down to his name on the wiki being KND Scientist with Yu-Gi-Oh! hair. Some other shows that used Yu-Gi-Oh! As a background detail for jokes include The Simpsons, who didn't parody the card game, but rather chose to include an ad for a Yu-Gi-Oh! Price Guide book. Yeah, in Season 15's Magical History Tour, you can see in the background a poster advertising a Yu-Gi-Oh! Price Guide book. These are coming up a little bit later, but what a strange pull for the animators to include.
Is this really the
Given that it's right
recipient's
next to a
address?
poster for everybody who hoops.
I guess I'll just
the
have to
joke
deal
was
with
just
it.
how dumb the idea of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Price Guide was back then, but
I need a team recommendation.
the background detail modeled on a real poster one of the writers saw in a bookstore. So you're telling me that Yu-Gi-Oh! Can't get more than a background detail, but Bakugan gets a whole B-plot? And where there's smoke, there's fire. Family Guy. All shows included a Yu-Gi-Oh! reference, sitting nicely alongside its Street Fighter and JoJo parodies. In the Season 5 episode Road to Rupert, Stewie's teddy bear is sold at a yard sale.
I can just replace Yao there.
Stewie finds the seller on the FBI stairs. The 3 shows he's listed as watching include Cold Case, Without a Trace, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Finishing out the trio of adult animation is the perpetually cancelled classic
Is
The
this
Venture
really the
Bros.
recipient's address?
Except instead
Do
of
you
a
want my
service-level
mic?
joke or background gag, it goes for way too deep a cut. In the season 3 episode
glass
Orb,
and roses
Team
on
Venture
my
finds
grave?
ancient treasure that's little more than
I don't
junk
have
or
much to
garbage,
contribute on the front
including
line.
a copy of the card
I'll
Ancient
count on
Gear
you guys.
Fist. The card is not notable in any way. It's not iconic, it's not good. It wasn't even especially common. The most noteworthy aspect of the card really is that it was referenced in the Venture Bros. The last show I want to look at is Mad, the 2010 parody sketch show that aired on Cartoon Network based on the magazine of the same name. One of their skits is the borderline unwatchable Greats in Anime, which parodies a bunch of different anime that were popular at the time, including Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, and of course Yu-Gi-Oh! Using the backdrop of
God, of course, they're gonna
it's
show
not
up.
unwatchable because it's bad. It's unwatchable
Where?
because it gets too much stuff right. Watching this is like opening a sarcophagus and getting a disease that hasn't existed for years and doesn't have a name. Getting flashbanged with Caramel Dancin', Over 9,000, and fucking Pedo Bear wasn't what I wanted to see on a Friday afternoon, but we're going down to the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Parody they did was Yu-Gi-Oh! This sounds a lot more like what a lot of Mad sketches were, which was service-level word association. But what's weird is how clearly one person working on this liked the game, and the other didn't. Yogi Bear plays cards like Smarter Than the Average Bear and Blue-Eye White Dragon, but then Ranger Smith plays Amazoness of the Sea and Gigaplant. These are both great cards, and they're even rendered as close to their original artwork as possible. Frankly, I'm more confused now than if they had just made up all the cards. Speaking of Mad, though, the magazine itself did also contain a few Yu-Gi-Oh! Parody cards in their Mad Kids magazine, including Mental Zero Lane Wingman, Moist Cyberstain, and Superior Sheriff Boss Frog 4,
I smell
which,
the
in another
sweet fragrance
confusingly
of
accurate
souls.
references the fake term for the card Dark Armed Dragon, Dad.
Quiet.
One guy working at Mad was putting his whole back into letting kids know that adults like this game too.
The power
and
of
to him,
wishes will protect
so-
us all. I smell the sweet face.
You know, I'm gonna incorporate this lady.
Too noisy.
Come, stop that.
Quiet.
Don't you block two enemies, what's wrong?
Cards. With the sort of success that Yu-Gi-Oh! Saw in its initial blitz, it was inevitable that some sort of bootleg knockoff would find its way into the hands of kids. Anybody who's ever been to a swap meet, yard sale, or flea market can tell you they're fit to burst with all sorts of cheaply made knockoff garbage that you have to ask who they're even for. Now, I'm talking these little freaky-looking Pokemon figures that kinda look like the real thing, but not really. You've seen stuff like the Sense of Right Alliance, and, no surprise, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has these too. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Knockoffs, of course, exist in the traditional sense with packaged figures that use the branding. But with Yu-Gi-Oh!, the much more common example are the bootlegged cards.
Will protect us
No
all.
one quite knows where they came from, or rather come from, since they're still readily available as recently as the Lincoln. But given their appearance on sites like Temu, Wish.com, and AliExpress, which are infamous for selling cheaply made Chinese bootlegs, and that's probably our best guess. You might not be able to tell the difference between the genuine article and the copy at first glance, but there are finer details you can pay attention for that will give up the ghost. Like the Anubis eye sticker in the corner, whether it's jagged or smooth edges, or if the card is called Toon Ghibli Shock Troops. Yeah, these never fooled anyone. Some cards could get kinda close to the original template, but most of them are so far off and use this cramped text box that makes it impossible to list off a monster's actual abilities. They also usually have a couple extra numbers thrown onto the attack and defense, meaning Toon Ghibli Shock Troops has 23,100 attack points on a level 4 body. I'm still fighting Alice here. Quality is the toilet compared to the real thing. Is this weird, waxy film on the front you can actually peel off to remove? and the blinding star foil that comes with it. These things were everywhere when Yu-Gi-Oh! Was at its most popular, and now tons of people with card collections somewhere in their childhood bedroom have these random cards that ask you to put back the cards into pack, into standby bag, then reshuffle, then take out the ones with the same number. This is a magic card with 4,600 defense. Yeah, when I said these cards were probably from China, the quality wasn't all I meant. Effects and names of these cards are all over the place. They're ranging from direct translations of the Japanese names, to close approximations of the English name, to whatever the hell Dog Sufferer is. The most famous one,
Yes,
of course,
Dog
our
Sufferer.
Rabbi, but let's not forget your friend and mine, cartoon Black Devil Girl, or Prince of the Devil's Underworld Hearts, who is only effective in the open country, alright, no borders. No power for the demons in your own open country during the fighting. This card has no way to special itself from the Semtree card, don't even try it. Oh, you thought this was a US exclusive problem? France comes in clutch with Defender's coming in Kino. This card says if there are 7 instruments of Ninja's cards and the stone tablet on the battlefield or in the
I never got to burst with her.
upon free the unlimited powers of the evil god of hell and destroy your opponent controls and
Enjoy the release.
Solemn.
I smell the sweet fragrance
Dion
of souls.
text
I smell the...
Learning Yu-Gi-Oh! Is far from easy. Outside of the basic stuff like summoning mechanics and how the game actually works, there are so many different systems working under the hood that you could play 100 duels and they never come up. But when they do, you realize this game is so much more complicated than it reasonably should be if it's marketed to children. We're talking about chain blocking, we're talking about if versus when effects, we're talking about what counts as effect negation versus resolution negation. A player who picks up the game to play Red-Eyed Black Dragon shouldn't have to worry about whether or not MST negates. Now, of course, you have to accept these because it's simply how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works.
The power of wishes
And the appeal for a lot of people largely comes from mastering all of these rulings in order to give yourself an edge. However, not everyone is going to accept these, on top of more surface-level stuff, and fail to cry Yu-Gi-Oh! As having changed too much, and wanting to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Like they did back in the old days. These are called Yu-Gi Boomers, and Yu-Gi-Oh's equivalent to Gen 1ers. They'll constantly complain that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gotten too complex.
Agreeable. They're Gen
Learn
1ers.
how the game even works. Outside of a memory of playing with the zombie structure deck 20 years ago. Now, if they took the time to learn the game, they could join the rest of us in complaining about how this game is too complex
Face your
and
fear
justified.
head-on.
Yu-Gi Boomers have a lot of different pieces of ammunition to throw at people when they express joy. But the biggest blow they have is a single card. One that to them embodies everything wrong with the game and should be thrown into an incinerator. Endymion, the mighty master of magic. This is a level 7 spellcaster pendulum monster who holds the record for the longest card text in the entire game, having the effect both in its monster effect and pendulum effect.
I do not know what the fuck is going on.
These are basically monsters that can double as spell cards. Except I'm here to explain this as simply as I can. This card is not hard to understand. It's scary because of text bloat, but once you learn the effect once, it's really easy to understand. Pendulum effect. Remove 6 spell counters to summon it. Pop as many cards on the field as you have spell counter monsters. On the field, negate spells and traps by returning spell counter monsters to your hand. It's indestructible when it has counters, and you can respell when it dies. Yu-Gi-Oh's lack of keywords like magic and other TCGs have make effects look a lot longer than they really are, and Endymion is the biggest victim of this. Despite the ease of understanding the effect, Endymion has become the Yu-Gi Boomer poster child, always shown as an example that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dumb and gimmick, and should go back to Feral Imp Beatdown. Now, full disclosure, I'm biased. I played it. It's one of my favorite decks in the game. So seeing this guy brought up is like a dog whistle, that the person complaining likely has no idea what they're talking about. If they really wanted to talk about a confusing card, they'd go for something like Mischief of the Time Goddess, or Clock Lizard, or Curse of Bean.
Activate!
A card from those old ages they want to go back to. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been and always will be a complicated game. They just don't acknowledge this because that's not how they play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the way they played Yu-Gi-Oh! never really existed. Yu-Gi-Oh! As it was played at recess, in the lunchroom, and after school was never
That stupid fucking
what
attack
the game
stuff.
was actually supposed to be like. Nobody really fully understood the rules, had an idea about what rulings were. People today still have no idea how last turn resolves, and most importantly, everybody has a different idea of what classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Should be. I want to go back to classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Oh, thank God, I finally found somebody to play the 1997 format with. Would you get mad at a revision of Scrabble because it doesn't use house rules that you played with when you were 5 years old? No, that's ridiculous. But that's essentially what it comes down to with Yu-Gi Boomers' complaints about Yu-Gi-Oh! Do they have legitimate complaints? Obviously. Yu-Gi-Oh! Does have a horrible new player experience. You basically need somebody who already knows the game to walk you through your first 100 games to understand what's going on. However, just because they can make a good complaint doesn't mean they usually do. Yu-Gi Boomers don't complain about why certain card rulings are so obtuse, and how wording doesn't really make sense when two cards with very similar effects do different things. They'll complain about Madolche looking silly, or not being able to play Gravity Bind anymore. Alright, I was talking about the Axeman video, it's really
Enjoy the release!
Yu-Gi-Oh! What are you talking about? What the cards he shows as an
Face your
example
fear
of how old Yu-Gi-Oh! is from 2022!
will protect us all!
I smell the sweet fragrance of plans, and I'm supposed to take him seriously? Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't stay in stasis after 2006 when they stopped playing. Like any ongoing game, it's evolved. And trying to go back to an earlier format, while entirely possible, isn't going to happen for the newest parts of Yu-Gi. It just won't. I know this conversation about Yu-Gi Boomers in the Endymion section might feel a bit disconnected, but it's an overarching thing. Endymion is just the poster child for this sort of problem. If you see my buddy Endymion now, make sure to treat him less like the red-headed stepchild, and
I surrender!
that whoever is posting about him hasn't seriously played the game since Mirror Force was a problem card. The Hygiene Rule. The darkest day in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. So, competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Events don't really need an introduction. They're about what you think they are. A bunch of people gather together in one place and play Yu-Gi-Oh! To decide who's the best. And of course, like any organized event, there are certain rules that need to be followed in order to participate. Codes of conduct and etiquette that should be common knowledge to just about everybody. Don't show up with a pornographic playmat, or pornographic card sleeves, or pornographic cards, or pornographic clothes. This is a rule that has to be enforced. There is one rule, though, a rather recent rule that managed to breach the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community and go viral all over the web for all the wrong reasons. On April 3rd, 2019, the official tournament rules got a new subheading under the Duelist Responsibility section, subsection I, Hygiene. This subsection addresses a problem that had cropped up at events, and that players smelled like wet ass. The ruling now requires that if you plan on attending Konami-sanctioned events, you must be clean and wearing clothes that are clean. If you or your clothing are excessively dirty or bad-smelling, you can be penalized and potentially kicked out. Now, smell is not an exclusively Yu-Gi-Oh! Problem. It's actually why we shower. Lots of times, like Magic and Smash Bros. Have had issues with smelliness in the past. And some of them are even more notorious for it than Yu-Gi-Oh! is. The problem is that in these other communities, it's an unspoken rule that deodorant is strongly encouraged. It's a rule that isn't often followed, but whatever. Yu-Gi-Oh!, meanwhile, is one of the only major organized hobbies like this, where the problem got so bad, it had to be baked into the rule set of the game itself. It's now tournament illegal to be smelling. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that needs its players to be in close proximity to each other. And for events like YCS's, where players are packed in tight, Being surrounded on all sides by roadkill sounds like a horrible incident after
Nevermore!
But it didn't stop people from clowning on Yu-Gi-Oh! Players hard for being told you have to shower. With reports coming out of people leaving events because of how bad they smell. People refusing to go to events because they didn't like the new rule. And of course, the most demoralizing one. People began posting the officially licensed Yu-Gi-Oh! Shampoo kit. With Dark Magician Shampoo, Exodia Deodorant, and Millennium Puzzle Soap. God damn it, it's even on a rope too, like in the anime.
Thank you for tuning in.
Censored card art. If how much censorship the original series underwent wasn't enough to fill you in yet, yeah, Japan has very different ideas about what is child appropriate versus what America does. In one nation, buzzsaws and boobies. In the other, dark energy discs and the Bible. Except we can't even have that. Yu-Gi-Oh! Card art is first and foremost made for the Japanese market, so it conforms to Japanese sensibilities, which are, in a word, loose. Cards like the Harpy Ladies, Amazonesses, and The Last Day of Witch are able to depict some pretty gruesome and explicit stuff that you just can't get away with in America. So, what do Americans do? Well, there has to be some censorship applied to the cards to make them printable without putting the packs labeled as pornographic gotcha games. We save that for the pornographic gotcha games. Frequent targets for censorship include scantily clad bodies, violence, blood, or religious imagery. That's like half the card pool. So for the Harpy Ladies, all that bare skin they're showing gets covered up with a nice full-body skin suit that covers up anything naughty. With how much the Harpy archetype has been supported, this resulted in every single Harpy card ever released being censored in some way, shape, or form. Except Harpy's pet dragon, that guy knows how to keep it clean. Amazonessa's got a similar treatment, though there's still a good amount of big buff ladies half nude for you to admire. And The Last Day of Witch went from a horrific scene of witches being dragged to burn at the stake into... Those are cards that at least realistically warranted censorship. Like Barrel Dragon. It's just a dragon made of guns. But then you have a card like Artifact Sight. Did you even know this card was censored in the TCG? Wanna guess how? Well, in the TCG, his legs are scrunched up like this, but the Japanese version of the card just let his note hang out for the entire race he has to say. Or what about Tearelement's Happiness, where they added an extra layer to Happiness's boob cage? A lot of card censorship is so subtle that unless it's pointed out to you, you won't ever notice it's there. And when you do notice it, you'll get flung into a blind fury. Because 5% less of Happiness's armpit is visible! The most infamous example of puritanical Yu-Gi-Oh! Card censorship comes from the Fluffle archetype, which is both the soft and cuddly Fluffle monsters and the Edges, who are various bladed weapons. Fuse the two together and you get the Frightfur archetype, a collection of stuffed animals with bladed weapons shooting out of them, based on the old myth of teddy bears having razor blades sewn into them. Even with the darker slant to the original Fluffle designs, they're not that bad, are they? But the TCG chose to censor these cards by turning all of the bladed weapons into energy discs. This is a decision that nobody fully understands. I don't think anybody would have gotten up in arms over the Fluffle's designs, but to be safe, I guess, they decided to change them anyway. And of course, if you're looking for the card with the most censorship, look no further than Spy See Spy. This contains smoking, alcohol, and a pretty lady. Those are like the three worst things you can have. That doesn't mean some fun can't be had with their censorship, like with Barrel Dragon. Instead of being made of revolvers in America, he's made out of laser cannons. Well,
I am not doing difficulty for that.
To Toon Barrel Dragon, the Japanese have decided
They really are playing around Yao being a character
TCG version
that
of the
deals
card
magic
since
damage
it's meant to be
nowadays,
the version of
huh?
the original monster.
You're just expected to die now, huh?
Which, though, you're in luck because you can get a TCG printing of the uncensored Japanese card by participating in the Lost Art promotion. These are events you can play at officially Konami-sanctioned card stores that will have the uncensored versions of cards you can finally see in all their NSFW glory. There are a lot of cool cards that have been released this way, like Dark Ruler Hades, or, as you may know him, Prince of the Devil's Underworld Hardis, getting his horns back, or Ring of Destruction, getting
Why would they remove
fire
horns?
or the Golden Statue version
Did
of
they
Sentinel
fear
of the
people
Thousand
would be
Days. Since these are
horny?
specialty stores and not hidden away in packs, they're not held to the same standard as other cards and are free to show whatever heinous stuff they want. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players can't read. Alright, so as we close things out here, you're about to enter the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Proper. And if you're doing that, there's one thing you need to know above all else. One fact that you're going to carry with you from your first deck held together with rubber bands and stored in a sandwich bag, all the way up to the World Championship.
Why is
Yu-Gi-Oh! players
Eve
can't
above
read.
everyone
It is
now?
an affliction that is widespread. No one is immune from it. It's a
I
truth
believe
every
in a
Yu-Gi-Oh!
pain.
player must admit. Yu-Gi-Oh! players
Okay.
are incapable
Fine.
of reading. Alright,
go.
so what do I mean?
I should switch to a cooler
Well,
Batman
Yu-Gi-Oh!
team.
effects are
Go!
pretty hard to summarize from just a funny picture on the card.
Firewall
But what
debugging
scene will
completed.
what-
You're under protection now.
So, Yu-Gi-Oh! cards have sections called Effect Text, where you can learn more about what this guy's all about. Yu-Gi-Oh! cards have effects. Most of them do, at least. So you'd think it would be important for players to learn the effects of their cards, and what other cards they can expect to
Thank
see.
you for your
Nope.
warm
Yu-Gi-Oh!
invitation.
That
players
Zoya?
are infamous among their own.
No, that's Camel. It's even
Teasing
worse.
and wine,
Oh my
for
god,
being
there's so much
incapable of reading
healing.
their own cards and remembering what they say or what they do. And of course, I have a very personal example. Every Paleozoic monster has the ability inherent to them.
Oh boy.
People will throw ash blossoms, effect veilers, and any sort of monster with effect negation at them, only for them to do nothing. Watching these evolve and the Paleos just don't go anywhere is like heroin to me. You want a really good example of it? Players not being able to read just won a major YCS in Japan. Yeah, the duelist on the right summons a Ryziel Xyz monster, which normally can only use Ryziel monsters as material. But he uses a monster that isn't a Ryziel. The opponent didn't notice and let the play go through, resulting in him losing.
Bruh,
Obviously, this joke is just that.
that's hilarious. What the
Players
fuck?
have a hard time remembering all the effects on the field, or that linger after another effect resolves. It's a complicated game, and those sorts of mistakes happen. I'm not even immune to it myself. I constantly have to remind myself that the card Lost Wind can only affect special summon monsters, so I can finally stop negating my own special summon monsters when my opponent normal summons. It's simply the frequency that these sorts of mistakes happen that led to the term being coined. And as long as the game stays as complicated as it is, people will continue to make mistakes.
I smell the sweet fragrance of souls.
Oh!
Overflow. Warning!
I smell the sweet fragrance of souls. Good show's about to start.
D-Matrix. Activate. Overflow. Warning!
Good show's about to start. Good show's about to start. Good show's about to start.
I did a good job controlling my strength this time. I'm always afraid.
And now it's time to get a little spooky! Every Yu-Gi-Oh! pack is personalized! Yeah.
What?
TCG deck profiled on the last video. I shipped my Malice deck.
Ah, the so-called rogue TCG player plays Malice. Maybe he meant more in the sense... Maybe they meant more in the sense of a... rogue program?
Bonk. Destination.
Overflow.
I
Bonk.
smell the sweet fragrance of souls. I smell the sweet fragrance of souls. I smell the sweet fragrance of souls.
D-Matrix. Activate.
Good show's about to
Enjoy the release. Overflow. Warning.
I smell the sweet fragrance of souls.
Overflow. Warning.
Good show's about to start. Good show's about to start. Good show's about to start.
Enjoy the release. D-Matrix. Activate.
Death is your only death. I smell the sweet fragrance of souls. Good show's about to start.
I will suffer no longer. That is good.
Really is just like the Abyss. That took me an hour. Good God. This is very tolerable, I suppose. It definitely helps that I, got the new battle pass thingy. Darren just absolutely wrecks shit now.
Chief, I guess it's hard for someone like you to talk about your worries, right? Why not?
No commissions tonight, so I'm here for